Back home now, the focus has been on Canberra and the cash economy. The Treasurer mandating that businesses providing essential goods and services will need to accept cash. Now, 1.5 million Australians still use cash in an increasingly cashless economy. Joining me now is the Opposition Leader Peter Dutton. Peter, great to see you. First of all, do you support what the government's trying to do here?
Well, Laura, from what I can see so far, it's nothing more than a thought bubble, and I think probably a distraction from the Treasurer, who frankly should be spending his time on working out how to bring down inflation. We need cash in our society, that much is obvious, and there's, as you point out, a trend in terms of cashlessness, but we still have the need for a currency in our society, and I don't see any revelation in what the Treasurer has announced or the thought bubble that he's given rise to today.
Yeah, there's also a suggestion that the banks are going to have to cop a levy as well. Does that sit well with you?
Well, we don't want to see any levies applied because they ultimately get passed on, and in an environment at the moment where people can't afford to pay their mortgages, their insurance bills are through the roof. Under this government's renewables only policy, their electricity prices keep going up, the gas prices keep going up, and I just don't think Australians can afford another Labor tax, and that's the real concern that I hear as I move around the country. Families are really, really struggling under the Albanese government. They just can't manage the economy, and our country is heading in the wrong direction.
Has there been a bit of a recalibration in your thinking since Trump's victory in the US? Because largely, and you know I was there, it came down to people living out of the cities just not being able to afford the alternative. That's what they thought. They thought that Trump was better for their cost of living.
Well, I think what we've seen here in Australia, and perhaps there's some parallel in the United States with this, the Prime Minister has made a deliberate decision, a deliberate political decision to go with the elites, and he's left behind people who are struggling in the suburbs. That much is obvious, because people are sitting around kitchen tables now. They can't pay their bills. People are just stressed to the max, and it's because the government has taken decisions which have forced up inflation, and that's why grocery prices are up. It's why it's not just your electricity bill going up, it's the farmer's electricity bill, it's the box or the glass manufacturer, the packaging that your products are coming in. All of their costs have gone up, and they're passing it on, and that's why I think people are really shaking their heads, realising that it's tough now after just 2.5 years, and how much worse it would be if they had to suffer 3 more years of the Albanese government.
Who are the elites that you're talking about?
Well, if you look at the Prime Minister's own lens on the world, he looks at it through the Graindler lens. He looks at it through what can he do to stop people leaving the Labor Party to vote for the Greens. He's obsessed with the Greens, and he's forgotten about people who are working out in the suburbs. The Labor Party now has been dragged so far to the left, not just on the woke stuff, but the economy and the national security decisions. He's made our country less safe because they've let criminals out of immigration detention. He's made our country less safe because they brought in 3,000 Gazans without security checks, bringing people from a zone which is controlled by a terrorist organisation. And people are saying, well, hang on, what are you doing for us? Well, all they've done is drive up inflation. Interest rates have already started to come down in the US, in Canada, in New Zealand, and in the UK. And here, interest rates should have come down by now, but of course under this government they haven't.
But isn't the irony that Donald Trump's election means that we'll probably see interest rates stay higher for longer here?
Well, look, I mean, if you listen to Jim Chalmers, he's blamed the conflict in Ukraine, he's blamed the conflict in the Middle East, he's blamed everybody for inflation in this country. But as the Reserve Bank Governor points out, inflation here has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It has nothing to do with Ukraine or with what's happening in the Middle East. It has everything to do with Labor governments who are spending like drunken sailors. And that's what's driving up interest rates. In Victoria, I went to Melbourne 3 times last week to different events and spoke to a lot of people. They are desperately hurting, and it's an example there of a Labor government which is destroying the economy. And the Federal Party is doing that as well, and that's why families are struggling, it's why small businesses are closing, and it's why the economy is starting to slow.
And I see in the Herald Sun today that you've announced that suburban rail loop, you've essentially making this an election issue, saying that shouldn't go ahead. Instead, it should go into fixing roads around Melbourne. Is that right?
No, look, I've seen some media reports this morning, Laura, that they're not accurate. We're happy to provide support to projects, but not if the state government has no hope of putting their own money in. So if I entered into any agreement with Jacinta Allen at the moment, I'd want to see the colour of their money first, because they have wrecked the Victorian economy, and I want to see more money spent in Victoria on road infrastructure. I want to make sure that we can support good projects, and we'll do that. But as I say, I've seen some of the reports this morning that aren't accurate.
Okay, so what is the position on the suburban rail loop then? That it's not a priority, you want to see the state government fund more than 50%? What is it?
Well, Laura, again, we haven't seen the business case. We haven't seen the colour of the Victorian government's money. Where is it? I mean, they're near broke. The Victorian Labor Party has completely wrecked the Victorian economy. People are leaving and taking their businesses to South Australia. I want to see a Victorian economy which is thriving again. I want to see jobs, I want to see the vibrancy, and Victoria is a great state, but at the moment it's got a shocking state government, and they know that Anthony Albanese shares many of the same outlooks as Jacinta Allen, and together the Albanese and Allen governments are doing a lot of damage in Victoria.
So a bit of reporting around at the moment as well, Peter Dutton, that you're walking away from committing to the stage 3 tax cuts as your government first designed them. Is that true?
Well, Laura, the point I made last week, which is an obvious and frankly a responsible one, and that is we want to see the books before we commit to any tax cuts. The government is spending money, again, back to the Reserve Bank governor's constant warnings. Interest rates are higher in this country because the Albanese government continues to splash money out, and that fuels inflation, which keeps interest rates higher. It makes sure that, as I say, not just your mortgage is higher, but the farmer and the builder and the manufacturer and the food packaging supplier, all of their repayments are going up as well, which is what fuels inflation. So let's see how much money's in the bank and let's see what room we have to move. But we're going to act responsibly, as we've always done. I was Assistant Treasurer to Peter Costello, and I've worked with John Howard and subsequent leaders on budgets, and I know how to deliver a budget and how to make sure we get our economy and our country back on track. And they're creating a mess at the moment, as Labor always does, in terms of economic management, and we'll announce our policies ahead of the next election. Yeah,
it sounds like it's going to be very hard to go back to that, given what you've said with Labor spending and where the economy is at. Is that about accurate? It's going to be really hard to keep that promise.
I think the point I'd make is that I want to get inflation down, because if we can get inflation down, we can get grocery prices stabilised. Well, not spending in the reckless way that Labor's doing at the moment, heeding the advice of the Reserve Bank Governor. Again, we'll heed the advice of the Reserve Bank Governor. We'll look at the economic settings at the time and how much money's in the bank. But you can't go out there pretending to people that by giving them $10 a week that their mortgage rate is going to come down. It won't. And that's the problem that the government's got. They feel the need, as Labor always does, to tax and spend, but that is inflationary, and that's why interest rates are coming down in comparable economies, but not here in Australia. And inflation will continue to be a problem for as long as the Albanese government's in power. And as we know, interest rates are always cheaper, always lower under a coalition government compared to Labor.
Yeah, that's not always a sign of a good economy. I mean, they almost went to zero during COVID. That's because we were struggling.
Well, a very different period during COVID, and at the time, as you recall, Labor advocated more spending than what the coalition committed to in terms of JobSeeker and JobKeeper and the other assistance that we provided to business. So Labor's instinct will always be to spend more, but it drives up inflation, and if it drives up inflation, it drives up interest rates.
Okay, let me ask you as well, because there's a poll, a freshwater poll in the AFR today talking about who is best equipped to handle the Trump administration. You out-poll Anthony Albanese, and I say this just being in the US and being scarred by all of the polling that was completely wrong and didn't accurately predict a Trump victory, but hey, here we are. So let me ask you, do you think you're better equipped to deal with the next 4 years of Donald Trump, and have you reached out to his team?
Well, Laura, I think I'm better equipped to lead our country, particularly in difficult times, because we have a weak Prime Minister at the moment who doesn't know the difference between right and wrong when it comes to national security. His instincts are all wrong when it comes to the economy, and we need to have a Prime Minister who can stand up for our country's best interests and argue our corner, and I believe that I've got the experience and the capacity to do that. And if the Labor Party, I see some of the negative polling, the negative ads that they're putting out at the moment, if the Labor Party wants to be saying to the Australian people that the next election is a referendum on who is best able to manage the economy and national security, I'm happy to have that debate any day of the week, because what we've seen over the last 2.5 years is damaging the Australian economy and hurting Australian families. I know there's a much better way. We can get our country back on track. And we can make sure that our country heads in the right direction. At the moment, the Albanese government, in every decision they're making, is taking our country in the wrong direction. So I think in terms of our most important ally, the United States and President Trump, I can work very effectively with him and with other world leaders, and I think I've demonstrated that in senior portfolios over a long period of time.
So we use that Reagan term that was then used by Trump. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? In our case, 3. And many Americans answered no.
Well, I think you noticed that I've used that phrase before, and I think it's a very pertinent consideration. I used it in my budget reply speech, as I recall, back in May, so well before the election that's just taken place in the US. But as I say, Laura, as you move around the country, when you're talking to people, people are scared because they just can't pay the bills. People are taking kids out of schools because they can't afford the school fees. People are cancelling insurance policies on their homes because they can't afford to pay the insurance and the mortgage. Pensioners are turning off the air conditioner this summer because they won't be able to pay the bill. That is not a country in 2024 that frankly, the Albanese government should be proud of creating.
Well, what are you promising them when they say that to you, Peter? What are you promising when they say that to you? How are you going to fix it? What solutions did you offer them?
Well, I'm saying look at our track record, Laura. Look at what we did when we were in government. As you pointed out before, the cash rate wasn't 4.35; it was 0.35, and families could afford to get into homes. We've got young Australians who can't afford to get into home ownership and have given up the dream of home ownership under this government. This government has a lifetime rental proposal to put to people. People want to own their own homes, and what we've said in our first instalment of the home housing policy is we'll put $5 billion in to create 500,000 new homes with backyards, and that will help meet the supply side of the problem. But the government's had 2.5 years to do that, and they've not done it. They continue to bring in people through the migration program in their Big Australia policy. They sought no mandate for it at the last election, and that is not something that we will pursue. So there will be stark differences between the parties in relation to energy. To answer your question about differences and what we're saying to people, we are the only party with a credible policy to meet our net zero by 2050 commitments through nuclear power, firming up renewable energy. The government's policy is going to blow out by $500 billion, and it's going to drive up the price of electricity and gas. If Australians think their prices have gone up over the last couple of years, just wait for the next 3 years. It'll be a disaster.